Okay, my name is Naomi. Probably many of you know me, but for those of you who don't, I am a coach and player for Dropouts, formerly Bonsai in EU and Para for a little bit. And I mostly coach macro stuff because I think that really kind of overrides micro, especially now, especially the meta that we're in at this moment and kind of like the trajectory of New World in general. Started off with individuals being able to carry like a lot of the weight in wars, where you had a bruiser like on their own who could just like wipe 6 people in an instant. And we've sort of gone from that to the point now where we need multiple groups just to like kill 2-3 people in a clump. Because that's kind of the state of the game, because we're kind of moving from less focus on the individual to more focus on the group, macro really matters even more now than it used to. So I'm going to talk about basic meta right now, what I kind of think is sort of going on. Probably most of you here have a pretty decent idea already. And I'll talk a little bit about the inner outer lanes. Probably many of you have heard that terminology. It was something like I coined a while back. And it just sort of like kind of denotes the players that are sort of moving around closer to point, and then players that are moving kind of further on the outside. So I'll talk about those a little bit. I'll talk about some kill squad stuff. I'll talk about the DPS, and then I'll talk about like a couple more things, not really sure. Just in regards to the meta right now, a lot of the focus is around the point, and pretty much everything kind of lives or dies by what is sort of happening on the point. We used to be in kind of like a state of the game where, if you won really, really hard with your kill squad, that outside winning kind of translated to inside winning too, kind of translated to resetting the enemy. That's not really the state of the game now anymore, at least in this meta. You can win really, really hard on the outside. Your kill squads can win a lot, but the healer pressure and like the removing of space that used to equal kind of like a full reset for the enemy just doesn't really happen now anymore, because it's a lot easier to sustain and harder for stuff to die on the inside. And healers, yeah, they need space to play, but you kind of have to be killing a lot of healers at this point for the main ball to really feel it. So that's why disruption, not a huge thing anymore. You don't see a lot of top quad players really doing that, and they really shouldn't be, because it's just not a lot of value. So yeah, essentially, because it's so main ball focused, it means every single kind of thing that's sort of happening on the outside really has to translate to like main ball pressure. So we're talking about like directly hitting main ball players. I will talk about sort of I think I can talk about the quadrants a little bit too. Let's say that this is like attack. I know you guys are doing a defense today, but most of what I'll talk about is really, it's also going to apply on defense too. The quad DPS that we have now, the slots that we have for maybe like spears or flamethrowers, but flamethrowers kind of like falling off now. And we have things more like spear and potentially even light fire staff players. And the kill squad players, so there are our DPS and the kill squad players, a lot of their attention now really has to be focused towards point. And not necessarily like as an initial thing, but sort of like that's what we're all playing for. If you even think about the wide fight for the kill squad players, they constantly in the back of their heads, they need to be thinking, okay, like, well, why am I having this wide fight, right? And if we thought about it in the past, we would say something like, well, we're having this wide fight because like we're going to beat them and we have this wider position. So, we have better split pressure, and we carry that over into enemy backline, pressuring healers, pushing them out of the position, potentially killing them. And we've won all this space and they can't play. And so everything on the inside is like feeling the pressure. But really now that can't be the case. Right? I mean, like you can do that a little bit. It's not bad. But really at this point now, we do this fight on the outside, and then any kind of advantage we get, and on the inside, and further towards the inside too, with the quad DPS, any kind of win that we get, instead of sort of like that translating to backline to hero pressure, now it's like we're actually just going to go and start directly pressuring main ball players. So what does this look like on a push? So you guys capped B and you're first and you're pushing, let's say this is C, we're on attack and we're pushing into C for the first time on the initial. Typically what you're going to want to have some of your quad DPS playing for this space, And then you kind of have to think about, how do we want our quad DPS on the left side sort of playing for this, right? We have our top left group, we have our bot left group. Probably we are going to want our bot left group to sort of be the first group to meet enemy quads sort of in this inner lane space in bot left. We don't really want to go to points like immediately. Obviously, like if you're playing on one of these right side quads, you're going to be like going to the quads and maybe you're sort of like just playing kind of like that or something. But for the most part on the initial, we're not trying to instantly bomb. We're trying to play for space a little bit, but we're sort of trying to get a little bit player advantage, potentially even kill people. You'll have your bot left group kind of play for this position initially. And in the past, it was really good to have the top left group, better to have them kind of like go wide and kind of maybe make space for the kill squads, right? Like kind of play with the kill squads and make space for them and like allow them to sort of like snowball their fight and kind of win on the initial. And then that top left group maybe would crash back into their position and just kind of default play as normal, right? On this sort of initial push. But now we're sort of in a state where, yeah, you probably want your top left group to go a little bit wide, but you guys kind of want to be playing sort of together, kind of as a 10-man for this inner lane space. Now, that doesn't mean everyone should be standing together. Like, it doesn't mean like we're all clumped together. Maybe top left group goes a little bit wider, but we're all kind of fighting for this on the initial. And you have your quad DPS too. At the same time that that push is happening, you're going to have your kill squad that's pushing, kind of also potentially maybe helping between these two. And as this push is happening, it's really, really ideal that we kind of have good pressure that's like synchronized together. Basically, let's say we have a really good push through here, and like let's say we're winning on this initial fight. We have really good presence here. Like let's say we diff the enemy here and like we're pushing through. But let's just say on the outside here, like let's say our kill squad is being held back. Let's say enemy is kind of like holding our kill squads back. And so like we have our kill squads kind of like back here and they're not able to push. Well, what does that mean for this inside push here? It means a couple of things, and they're not good. First is that enemy, instead of having to just retreat kind of backwards, well, now they can kind of retreat out to the side, right? They can retreat to the side. They can even wrap a little bit and push around. And they can kind of recover a little bit and hold space better and crash back into this potentially, or again, push around it. At the same time, it also means that any of the enemies that are pushing over here, they can also crash into the push, right? So this push in the inner lane is going to be a lot harder to sustain. It's like kind of double bad, right? It's like you have enemy pressure that's sort of like hitting you from the side. So the enemy gets like this nice split pressure on this push. And then also the enemies that you're pushing against in this inner lane, well, they have lots more room to like recover and dip out and come back in. So this push, because of that, is cucked. And the chances of it happening kind of just increase. And this works the exact way around, right? So let's say we have a really good push on this outer lane. Let's say our kill squads are doing really good. They're kind of like, we're kind of running over the other enemy kill squad, pushing up. We're getting good ground. But again, let's just say that for whatever reason, we got held back down here. Our quads and our quad DPS, they're all getting held back down here. The same thing happens, right? So any of the players that we're pushing back up here, well, now they have some space to push into the inner lane, and they can even use that space again to wrap around, to cut back in. And then similarly, any of these reds that are pushing through this position, that are holding this line here, well, they can cut into us as well, right? Obviously, coming in from on the flip side of this, when we're talking about outer being held back, the pressure that could happen to that push on inner is even worse. But regardless, they're both bad. So going back to what I said earlier, it's really, really important on these pushes, on these initial pushes, again, that we kind of are making sure that we're sort of like filling gaps as we're trying to push so that one side isn't necessarily being like fully held back, right? And we have good pressure moving through both these lanes. Now, who is going to be thinking about those gaps? Well, if we're talking about the bot left group, well, we probably don't want the bot left group to do that, because the bot left group, we probably want them to be the first people to meet here. So then maybe the people that are playing more for inner lane space, like our quad DPS, And then maybe the top left group, maybe they're thinking about some of the gaps a little bit on the outer as they're coming in. And still, again, trying to play for that inner lane space, but just thinking about potential gaps and maybe like being a little bit more mindful about what's happening on the outer lane. And then likewise, we can think about some of our kill squad players that are playing a little bit closer to the inner lane space, kind of playing at that sort of midpoint. And they can be thinking about the same thing, for the inner lane as inner lane is pushing and seeing how that's going, and potentially like, again, trying to fill in gaps and make sure that they're pushing in successfully too. And maybe we can say that like wide group and maybe another group that you have denoted as playing a little bit further out, maybe they're not thinking about those gaps as much. They're just hard playing for the line, right? So you have like a certain set of players that are playing to fill those gaps as you're pushing, and then some that are just playing to hard push the position and not set their mind on any other lane. But just in general, everyone needs to keep that in mind. On these initial pushes, this can be when you just maybe capped B and you're going over to C for the first time, or it can be on a reset. Let's say you guys get reset and you're coming in. This is constantly something that you have to be thinking about. Every player should be kind of mindful on these initial pushes. So we can talk a little bit about main ball stuff now and kind of how it relates to Kill Squad and the quad DPS, because I think the companies that have the most success right now, they have really good interplay between these two, right? So like I think in the past, we could kind of separate out these things, and Kill Squad does this stuff on the outside, pressuring healers in the backline and pushing through, and that is translating to it being harder for your enemy main ball players to sustain on the inside, which is still the case to an extent, but just not like it used to be. So let's just put up a scenario, for example. Let's say you're in a Kill Squad group, maybe not the wide group, but it could be the wide group. And let's just say that you just won your fight or something, and you're pushed up and you've got a lot of space. It could be on defense, it can be on attack, doesn't matter. It's kind of the same macro regardless. As you're gaining control and as you're sort of winning your fight and gaining ground, what you really want to be thinking about now is like how you're going to translate that to some of your players being able to flex off. Like let's say, you get a kill on the healer, maybe you guys focus down one more player in like the kill squad that you're sort of fighting, and normal thing to do would just keep going and keep running them over and keep pushing over to the position into the back line. But really now every player has to sort of be thinking about, okay, when am I going to have a chance to like instantly turn and start pressuring quad players, VGs, bruisers, be any of those kinds of people, any main ball enemy players, or maybe even assisting other kill squad players or other DPS players that are pressuring in that space. And as the point is ticking up, and this is going to apply whether you're in the fort or outside, as the point is ticking up, when we reach like, let's say 75% tick, everybody on the outside, even though we constantly want to be thinking about pressuring main ball players, your attention and like where you're going to put your body really has to be proportional to the tick. So the players that you're going to start focusing, the players you're going to start looking at, and where you're going to start putting your body as outside players is just going to get closer and closer and more inwards towards the point as that tick is going up. And you're not worrying about the random players that are just running around and existing on the outside, whether they're healers or not, right? You're looking to directly pressure main ball people. This is the same thing in Fort too. So when we start to like get to, maybe 50%, 60% tech, we have to start not really worrying about outside control, because the value you're going to get from that is just nothing compared to direct pressure to main ball players. So that's generally how should be thinking about things. Even the wide group should be thinking about it that way. These fights that we have, they cannot just be isolated, right? We can't just have these fights and then just like win our fight and then like nothing happens from that, right? We don't translate that to anything. And likewise too, if we're winning hard on the inside, if we're like our main ball is diffing hard on the inside, like that needs to translate to outside pressure. That needs to translate to the outside winning. But yeah, again, generally speaking, outside to inside pressure is always going to be easier, but the point still stands. Wherever you're winning, it needs to translate to some of us can flex off and help other fights. And this is just even more important than it ever used to be. Yeah, so quad DPS, kill squad players really start thinking now about actually hitting main ball people. The quad DPS are already kind of thinking about it. They're playing more inner lane space, so it's a little bit more obvious. But our kill squads on the outside have to start doing it now too, off the wins, off the control that we're getting. Does anybody have any questions at all about general macro for any of the specific quads any of the specific kill squad groups. Any general macro questions at all?
I have a calling question. So,
Sure.
for instance, I'm having a pretty big disjoint with calling things when it comes to like the point crashes and also like in relationship to what the kill squad is doing because it's so hard for me to kind of track where they're at and what they should be doing.
Mhm.
Well, I guess that's question A. Is there a good source of like communication to have the kind of outer lanes or even just the inner lane kill squads letting me know where they're at in a way that's not going to clutter kind of like the communications. And the second question I have is recently we've been doing pretty well against the kill squads we've been going up against, but occasionally there will be groups that leak through. So for instance, in our last push, there was just like a 5 stack of bows. I don't know where they came from or whose mans they were in general, but they found a way to get into our back line. Is there ever a scenario in which I should call back a kill squad group to come match that group? Because it felt like I was endangering bruisers, being like, hey, bruisers, go chase those
Mhm.
bows back in our road.
Well, definitely your bruisers are not going to be the people that you're going to want to have do that. You might be in a situation where, okay, let's just say you're on defense, for example. You could be in a situation where one of the kill squads, like Prio, preventing those other players from getting into your backline space and just kind of playing more front to back, right? Just playing sort of pure front to back and trying to hold that space. That's something that we've tried actually in dropouts a little bit. We've even done it on attack. I think you can do it on attack too. And it works. It can be risky if the enemy is smart enough and like flexes off a little bit. Because let's just say, for example, you're on defense and they're trying to wrap. Maybe you have a group and you're sort of holding them here, right? Well, we sort of go back to what I said before, where if you have a lot of interlane control and you have a lot of people that are pushed up here, while some of these guys now, even though they're being held back, well, now maybe some of them start flexing in because they realize, okay, we're not getting any value here. We're kind of spinning our wheels. So now they start pressuring this. That's a possibility that could happen. That's one way you can deal with it. You can try to deal with it that way. And I think there's some success there, right? You can just have a group that Prio's sort of front to back. Prio's holding that line and to not let any of them get into the back line there. Another way is you can just do exactly what they're doing, but do it better, right? So it's sort of like a trading roads kind of mentality. And I generally think that's pretty solid because, yeah, you could have a bow group in your backline. But if that's the case, right, you could just make the bet that you guys are going to do it better, right? You guys are going to pressure from that backline position better than whatever those bows will be doing. And I think usually that's the case, especially if you're playing off an advantage, right? If you're winning your side, like let's say you're winning strong side, like you're winning the fights in the inner and the outer lane, well, even if some enemies potentially like sneak through and get into the back, well, like it doesn't matter because you've already gotten so much space and you have so much tempo off that win. You don't want to give that up. You're pushed all the way up, especially with your kill squad. You've earned that space. That space is yours. If you've earned it, if you've won that control, if you're winning your fights, well, now what do you do with it? Your enemy main ball players, they need to feel it, right? It's like the control over here has to be for something. And right now it's really for the sake of any of the quads that are on that side that you're winning, it's not fun for them to play. It's just not fun for your enemy quads to be playing there. So you win all that space, and now maybe you say you want to send a group back here, but again, think about what you're giving up. You give up all the space that you earned getting to that position, and you also are losing out on potential pressure that you could be just directly doing to main ball people off of that win. So definitely like when you have advantage, you don't want to be sending people back. And if you're worried about enemy being in your backline, then maybe, yeah, you could try prioing one of your kill squads to play a little bit more front to back and deal with potential people like that coming in. Another thing, any control that we're getting, all of you guys must use that space. Whether we're on defense, whether we're on attack, we're constantly trying to push the line up. Whatever, like this general fight, you want it to be closer and closer and closer to the enemy fort as possible. Because what does that mean? It means enemy has less space to play with. You guys have more space. Point is more likely to start ticking up. And it's also harder for people to get pinned down. So for healers, you're mentioning like these bows going into your backline, right? And getting a lot of good pressure there. But if you win your strong side, well, the healers, some of these healers that are in the backline, they need to use that space. They need to push up and use the space fluidly as you guys are winning it so that any enemies that do come into your backline, well, now not as many healers are there because our healers are actually pushing up and taking space with the raid. Like we're trying to keep the body of the army kind of together. So that's another reason why generally not a good idea to be sending people back after they've won so much space, and instead just let them keep their tempo and pressure.
So along those lines, I think you pretty well explained like the theory of kill squad impacting interlane fights when you win control, but can you elaborate a little bit on what that looks like in practice? I guess, for example, I think default is look for main ball healers, but oftentimes like the healer pocket can be in a totally opposite space. Do you just look for impact on, let's say you're playing strong side, and whatever you can hit in main ball, and do you just keep rotating around to find the healer pocket, or something entirely different?
Well, you'll sort of notice that as you're winning that space, let's say it's on strong side or something, you're in defense and you're winning that space, the healers, they're getting pushed over more and more out of the position, and they have less and less space to play. Potentially even some of them are thinking about rotating into your backline and trying to play from there. If you're holding this position really well, that's good, right? It's like we're squeezing them out so they have very little space and we just have way more space to play. But even still, there's going to be wars where that's going to happen, and yet the point will still tick up and you're still losing. And so, yes, it's good to be holding space and like having lots of space, and it's just generally always going to be better that your enemy has less space to use. So don't ignore that and keep that principle in mind. But let's say you're a bow, and let's just say you're a fire staff in a kill squad group, and let's just say that you've pushed the enemy back, let's say to this position. You're sort of just running over them. Well, again, there's going to be some kind of threshold, some kind of point where that fight, it's going to maybe stalemate at some point, or you're going to keep pushing them out of the position and like kind of winning. And some number of people in that group need to look inwards for main ball pressure. And it can be healers, but honestly, it can be bruisers, it can be VGs. You can directly pressure those players because everything is so centered around the main ball fighting. It's not even necessarily about like confirming kills, right? You don't even have to necessarily kill bruisers or kill VGs. Just having that extra pressure on them makes it so hard for them to play that it elevates the possibility of your main ball diffing them. It gives more space for your main ball to play, removes space from them, so you're just able to hold and sustain and even potentially reset them. As you're gaining control, some number of you are not going to be needed for that fight anymore. They're not going to be needed for this to keep, pushing out of the position or even to hold it, right? And that means that some of those extra people have to pressure the inner lane and even people on point. Essentially players that are playing edges and that are trying to, again, control this space. Does that answer your question?
I think it did. Thank you.
Okay. There's so much focus now on main ball, and for a good reason. And again, like for fort stuff, like I'm not going to go over fort stuff. Fort's like its own kind of beast, but a lot of these principles still apply there, especially where your attention needs to be focused at any given time. In the past, even when points ticking high, we're still trying to like kill healers and still going for light players on the outside. But now when we have good advantage on the inside and when we're ticking a point, or even when the enemy's ticking a point and we're getting to like a 60%, 70% mark, fuck everything on the outside, pressure people that are playing edges, pressure main ball players directly.
So I did get a question. One of our kill squad players asked, how do you regroup as a kill squad if you lose the main ball fight? What do you do if point is lost and you won a kill squad fight?
So point is lost. If point's lost, is this for defense or for attack? It's sort of similar. But I would say, look, if point is lost, it's not going to really matter what happens on the outside. I think you should try to maintain your position. Let's say, for example, point loses really, really hard. And let's just say you're a kill squad and you guys have been winning. And let's say you're pushed up and you have this position. What I would say, if we're not talking about like you completely losing the point, again, remember, no matter where you are on the outside, your attention, when we start getting to 70% kind of mark, whether you're on attack or whether you're on defense, your inwards attention is proportional to the tick going up. So you're just starting to pay attention and look inwards as that's happening, focusing main ball players and players that are playing edges. But let's just say you're losing really hard, losing a lot on the point, and you have like a good position, right? You're winning your fight. Well, I would always say whatever you can do to keep that good position, keep it. Let's say you're on attack or something like that, and this is C, and points losing hard, but let's just say like maybe you're a wide group or something and you've won all your space all the way up here close to ramparts or something. Try and hold this. Try and stay here. You're not going to run back and reset if the rest of the raid has to reset. What you want to do is try and hold that space as much as possible. And if you have to kite that way to do that, or you have to kite forward or whatever you have to do that. And you're only going back with the rest of the raid as a last resort, because it's just going to be OP if when this reset happens that you start the fight from wherever you want and from advantage position, because it's like you already have the space.
I think the other part of the question too was like when main ball is losing, maybe the kill squad lost their fight or something, but just how to regroup as a kill squad, maybe as like weak side, or if the entire 10-man or the 15-man, like whatever it may be, how do they regroup?
If part of your group is dead and you're coming back in, and let's say you're a bow or something and you're really pushed up and you have a really good position, again, I would be very averse telling that bow to like run back and regroup together in the back and start playing together again, playing as a group. I don't think that's bad. Let's say you're a bow or fire staff and you turn back here to get back together with your group and start playing for control of your outside space again. Well, I would say only go as far back as you have to, right? Try and still maintain a higher up position as you're trying to like support your group, resetting up and pushing back in. Because again, if you have a good position, it's really hard for me to tell someone who has a nice position to just give it up. And I would say the only time that you really need to hard go back is if your group can't get back enough and take space again and be able to push up again because they're really literally being held back, then okay, then maybe you can go back and help. Short of that though, everyone needs to try and push up and take the space and start playing together again. And any players that were still alive, try and hold your space as long as you can. Anything behind you that you try to support, try and have your body be as least far back as possible. Try and constantly hold that higher position.
So I know you were kind of referencing like priorities when winning, like especially on strong side. Something that happened last war that I noticed is that when our strong side would win and would push everything back to like top left of point, that was kind of like a hard cut off for them, and then they would wrap back to help our road. But what it was doing was kind of making a pocket of 6 to 7 healers that just lived top left point in like a little safe bubble that I play weak side, and we weren't really able to clear through respawns long enough to get up there and effectively like kill that healer pocket. So would you say that completely leaving that healer pocket alone and plussing on point is still favorable to do?
The killing the healer pocket stuff is very old meta. It's not that it's not good to pressure those guys and to remove their space and to try and push them out of position, but I'm just telling you, unless your main ball is just hard diffing the other main ball, it's not good enough. And you're just not going to get the same value unless we're talking about killing many healers, 3+, 4+ healers. You definitely want to take the space away. Again, having more space to play with than your enemy is always going to be good. But all that space that you're getting, wherever your enemy main ball players, wherever they're existing within the space that you control, they must feel the pressure. Your kill squad pushing up into this position and having all this control behind them and having pushed the other enemy kill squad all the way back to like their back line, the quad players over here, it's got to be like not fun to play now. They can't play here now. No more playing on this side for them. And that means directly pressuring them and not so much worrying about the heals. One thing I will say is the caller is like huge now because everything is so much more team focused and we all have to work together to kind of like do what we want to do. So in terms of the caller, especially when crashes are being called, it's so huge if outside players now, if our kill squad players are listening to that, right? Because you could be some outside player, like you could be like a fire staff or something or a bow or something, and you hear that crash being called as you're pushing up here, like or as you're controlling space, and you quickly just toss your abilities at whatever clump that is, provide some extra burst, maybe flip that, right? And off of that one wipe, we know right now that one decent wipe in the main ball can just snowball into either, you're taking the point or enemy is resetting or, whatever. So all that stuff's really important too. It's actually really key that you have a lot of your kill squad players and your quad DPS players actually listening to caller too.
Sarah said the request was to draw the snakes.
Draw this.
It's an analogy.
Okay, so the snake thing is kind of in regards to pushing, right? When we're trying to push, this can be anywhere, right? Anytime we're pushing an enemy back, let's just say you have some of your heavy schizos and you have enemy heavy schizos, and then you're going to have some range players in the back that are kind of supporting, right? And let's just say we're pushing against each other, right? And we're kind of clashing. And let's say both sides are trying to push. The group that's going to be the most successful is a group that not only maintains pressure at the front, the head of the snake, but also at the tail. So you don't want all of the players here on either side just focusing everything towards the front. Some number of players need to be pressuring these players in the back because that's actually going to help the fight at the front, because if those players are getting pressured, like a healer or some lights, well, now who's ever at the front line is not going to have that same support, right? And this has to be a consistent thing, right? It seems like a fairly obvious thing, and even from a game sense perspective, probably some of you have done this before, where you sort of wrap around and you kind of don't focus on just the front line of the fight, and you're like focusing on players in the back, you're focusing on lights and stuff like that. And those players have to fall back, and because they have to fall back, the ones that were pushed up also have to fall back. That's just like the normal concept of it. But on an initial push, as we're trying to push in and take position from both an outer lane, inner lane perspective, we want to have good pressure moving through the inner lane, good pressure moving through the outer lane on the resets, or when we're just getting to a point for the first time. That dynamic needs to consistently happen if you want to continue to gain more ground. So it's like gap filling, right? That constantly needs to be happening as the push is going on to gain more and more and more ground. So the tail of the snake has to be getting pressured to those lights and stuff. All those people in the back, they must have some pressure on them too, while the people at the front are getting pressured as well. And whoever does that better, they're just going to probably win that push. They're probably going to win that initial fight and win more space. And that's what you want. It's not even necessarily about winning on the initial crash. It's almost like before we get into like any sort of back and forth fighting in sort of one position, you always want to have more space when that fight starts. This is the same concept on an opener when we say take space. We're telling people to take space because whenever our players initially clash, like in the quads, you want to be pushed up as far as possible before that fight starts, because then your enemy has less space to use and you have more space. You're just increasing the chance that you guys are going to win that fight. Your enemy just has less place to move around, and are increasingly more and more closed in. The same thing applies when you're pushing people.
I guess my real quick question would be 10-man comms, strong side, yay or nay?
So it can work, but only with respect to what kind of macro you're trying to pull off in the strong side, right? So right now in dropouts, we tried doing the 10-man stuff, but it's not quite working because we're kind of having each group try to do different things, right? Like maybe we're having one group playing a little bit more for inner space, and then we're having one group playing to hold a wider position, prevent wrapping. So having them be in the same comms when their jobs are different is not good, all right? Like people just get confused. They don't understand like where they need to be like prioing their attention. So in that situation, you don't want 10-man comms. If, however, you have some kind of strategy that you're trying to do that you think is good, where both groups are going to be focusing on the same thing the entire time, focusing on the same stuff in the same space, then yeah, go for 10-man comms. Go crazy.
I had a couple questions come in.
Yeah.
So the first one was when the enemy kill squad is overextended, be it to our road or just our safe side in general, what is the best way to punish them for it?
Thing is, you kind of have to ask yourself, well, how did they get there, right? Did they just rat their way past you guys and now they're over there doing it? Or did they actually beat you? Did they actually like win their fights, right? If they actually won their fight, okay, well then you're just gonna like have your group come back out and again try and push them out of the position, right? And maybe your quad DPS players are gonna be trying to help, maybe assist in that. If, however, you are pushed up and let's say you got that strong position first, again, I would not say go like give it up and turn around and go back to deal with it. You try and do what they're doing. Again, if you have this good position, do what you should be doing with the space that you've gotten, and that is trying to translate whatever that control is, whatever those gains are, to main ball, and do it better than whatever enemies have ratted their way into the back. If you deem it to be the case that, you know what, they're just getting way too much value back there, then I would say you could potentially have a kill squad group that constantly is trying to prevent that from happening, trying to keep that group further and further away and not let them actually set up and be in that position. And that's sort of just their job. That group doesn't do anything else. However, if your kill squad is just better and you deem your kill squads to be better, don't do that. Just do whatever they're trying to do, but just do it way better than them. Fight fire with fire, and you just have more fire. Your fire is just hotter.
Thanks. The other question was about Kill Squad and Fort. Things about like pushing in, taking control on top of B, dealing with B drop, positioning, etc., etc.
So you want kill squads at each gate, and you want both of them to try and play for initial space up top. It's just a matter of as you're playing for control and let's say you're winning, let's say you get a kill on the healer and then maybe you get another kill on one of the schizos or one of the ranged. That just means that there's some number of you that can pay attention to something else. You don't have to kill every single one of those players, right? You just have to kind of win the fight, win control of the space, and then some number of you guys are looking down towards the dirt, you're looking towards the main ball, you're looking for quad players themselves. You're also listening for the caller, for those crashes and throwing your spells at the crashes as much as you can. It's simple, you go up normally like how you would play for space on B wall as one of those side gate kill squad groups, play a little bit for control and just constantly be thinking about from a game sense perspective, okay, now's my moment, like now I can flex pressure into the main ball a little bit, right? Or maybe now I can direct the whole group. Maybe we can just ignore some of these guys that are up here. Screw them. Maybe they're not dying, or maybe we're just taking too long to kill them. Screw that. We're gonna look down at the dirt. We're gonna look towards point. We're gonna look for main ball pressure. That is different from the past where maybe you're looking down towards dirt, but you're looking more on the outside, right? You're looking more for healers and lights and players that are much more on the outside. But now it's different. Now we're looking inward and trying to get direct pressure there and make it not fun for quad players to play the game. For the back gates, it's the same thing. You want to come in, you want to get some kind of control, whether it's on stage, like let's just say we're attacking, get some control on stage, bully some of the healers if there's any healers healing the position. You could maybe even cross over to the other side if maybe you can like assist the other group that's trying to get in to kind of like win their fight and get a little bit of control. But again, after that, we're thinking about dirt pressure, increasingly focusing inwards towards hell, towards any players that are playing edges, and really getting good pressure on those players. Enable our main ball to diff.
I think that's good stuff.
All right. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening to me rant about macro. And yeah, I wish you guys success.